Lockie Fanning here on the Weekend Beat with author, philosopher and psychologist Carlos Camacho. We're talking about what makes athletes fail. Carlos, do athletes prepare to fail?
Failure is one of those things that we all avoid, and really we find it difficult to deal with it at any stage of our lives, including sport, of course. Now, athletes are prepared for failure when they reach a certain level because it's part of their training.
Yes, because in any match you're guaranteed to have a loser, aren't you, Carlos?
That's correct, and that's the beauty of sport. We talked about this last time as well, that sport is unpredictable, and therefore we do not know the results. No one knows the results, of course, and that's why as spectators we love it, but also as athletes, they know that once they get on the field, anything could happen. And so they need to prepare themselves for the match to win, but also to lose, because what happens is that in the end, as you said, Lockie, there will be a loser for that game anyway, but not necessarily for the whole season. Now, that loss can be used significantly in order to be able to recover and progress as an athlete.
There have been numerous other athletes recently that have gone on to have to do these silly things in their sports. Sebastian Vahemina was one of them in the World Cup semi-final. He actually elbowed one of his opponents, and that was one of the things that's all up in the brain, where it was just totally in his control. Right, not just missing a kick or missing a goal or dropping a football, where it was totally the game was on him, where he elbowed his opponent, and those kind of things need to be eradicated.
Yeah, brain explosions that we call. You see that a lot in amateur sports when you go around parks on a Sunday morning or Saturday afternoon and things get out of hand. But with professional athletes, they mimic these situations in training where they may get a bad decision and therefore they try to use techniques, psychological techniques, in order to diffuse their anger, because what happens is that they can release their anger with an elbow hit, as you said, or they can use that anger, channel it into their game. And of course, in physical sports like rugby, like soccer, because they're sports that anger can be used in order to achieve certain goals within the match, if you like. And so there's other sports that can go against you if we're angry. But those sports, these athletes use that. Now, what happened to Sebastian was that he probably trained for that situation, yet still had a brain explosion. And that's because we're human.
We are all human. And then another incident that comes to mind is Scotty McLaughlin in the V8 Supercars. In 2017, he had the championship all but sewn up. All he had to do was finish, I think, in the top 12. But he just, at the start of the race in Newcastle, things went against him. He tagged another opponent at a drive-through penalty, and then that set him back again. And then he tagged another opponent, spun their car around. And then at the final few corners, he put Craig Lowndes into the wall, and that set him back with a time penalty. And that was all on him again. Losing the unlosable, should we say, and then he's gone on to then win and bounce back and had the success to win the next two V8 Supercars championships.
Yeah, it's funny how you see that a lot. You see that in golf a lot, where someone just needs to maintain par to win the championship and they start hitting the ball differently because suddenly thinking becomes involved. What happens is that when we train something that we know almost automatically, like driving a car, manual car, you can drive a manual car and talk to someone or sing a song and you don't realize you're doing it. When athletes get to a certain level, whatever it is, either kicking a ball or hitting a ball, there's no thought. That's what we call being in the zone in sport. And it's wonderful. If you could just bottle that, it would be unreal, because everyone looks to get in the zone. Suddenly, when you're aware of the score, you're aware that the trophy's close at hand, your thinking starts becoming involved and all you can do is lose it. And sometimes that's exactly what happens.
You start to get that nervous energy, the yips, as they say.
Yeah, because you're not focused on the actual moment, which is either hitting that ball back if you're a tennis player, just striking the ball off the golf tee if you're a golfer, just kicking the ball into the net if you're a soccer player, or taking those turns, as you know, inside out, because these guys in racing, they know the cars and also the track very well. Suddenly, their body becomes stiffer because they're starting to think something outside of what they usually think about, and that is the score. That's why the best thing is not to think about the score. And you see that with great players like Federer. Federer may be match point down or up, and he plays the same shot.
And we saw that a few days ago with Rafael Nadal. He was down 5-1 in the deciding set in the ATP Masters against one of the young upstarts, and he had nothing to lose, and he started to play the same shots, and he come back to win that match. And he was very happy about that. But as you were mentioning there before, with the nervous and the yips, it seems like players are playing rather than doing what's second nature to them and having these talents, these wonderful talents that they do, they're almost suddenly playing and doing their very sport, not to lose rather than just what comes naturally, which is win.
That's exactly right. And it's so beautiful because that's what life is about. Because we're all in those situations, even though most of us are not professional athletes. We are in situations, even in our work, where we know what to do, yet under pressure, sometimes we do the wrong thing. And of course, in radio, it's wonderful that, of course, this is live, but sometimes when people have the option of recording, then they just continuously make mistakes. And you see that with bloopers with actors. They just can't get out of that.
Exactly.
The human mind is just amazing. So sports psychologists, they spend a lot of time working with the athlete in order for those moments not to drag on. You might have a bad moment, but don't allow it to affect you. And there have been some great athletes, sometimes not necessarily brilliant physically, but brilliant with their mind. And that's what's got them over the line as great athletes as well.
Speaking of athletes with their mind with sports psychology, we've had a few cricketers recently. We've had Will Pucovski a couple of days ago. He announced for him, the Australian team selectors, not to consider him for the test selection because of mental health issues. And also Glenn Maxwell, who stepped away from cricket because of mental health issues, because the pressure on them is just so intense. Even when they're doing well, the fans think that, they're doing well, why are they quitting? But it is just that intense focus to actually succeed.
That's exactly right. And in games like cricket, that you need that much focus for a long time, you need to be mentally stable. Not even looking at being in the zone. You need to get on the field with your mind quite stable, that everything's all right at home. If anything is out of balance, it's very hard to play properly. And that's not even getting into sports psychology. That's just purely psychology of the mind, where you need to have a certain basis. And that comes with just having a certain emotional stability. And that makes the fall and rise of some athletes, for example, like Tiger Woods, even more amazing, where this guy was number one, had it all. We all know what happened. He was down in the dumps, and yet a game so psychological like golf, he still bounced back 11 years later and won the biggest tournament. As a psychologist, that still gives me goosebumps. That is amazing. This guy's got an amazing mind.
Because he went through all kinds of trauma with his back, and no one even really thought he had a chance of winning another major again. And
That's right.
And then he's back right up there, and you could see the fans absolutely loving him. And the redemption story was one of the greatest sporting stories of the year.
It was. And of course, we separate the man or the athlete from his sport. Of course, like Maradona, you may admire him as a footballer, but maybe not as a person. But he himself, Maradona, says, do not use me as a role model for your children. Actually, he says it in third person. Do not use Maradona. So, and we have to be careful with having judgment of athletes of what they do outside in their own private life, because they don't owe us anything. They do whatever they feel is right. It might be wrong in our eyes, but we can still admire what they do on the field. And Tiger Woods is a perfect example. Another one, of course, is Tyson, who was an amazing athlete, yet we can all have reasons to dislike these type of people. But I think we need to keep our thoughts grounded and really expect reality, which is what can they do for us as spectators? Their life is their life.
Well, thank you to author, philosopher and sports psychologist Carlos Camacho for joining us once again on The Weekend Beat to talk about all things about how athletes deal with failure.
Thank you very much, Lockie. And I love coming here. Remember, for all those listeners out there, that learning how to fail is extremely important for success.
It certainly is. Thanks, Carlos.